Welcome to episode 90 of Rebirth Revolution. My name is Melissa Olson. The goings-on that we're observing daily are dizzying. It's wild. So much of it is just trying to determine what is true and what is not. We've had a technique skillfully used on us where those at the lowest levels of spiritual awareness and often at the highest levels of power have inflamed their supporters by saying that their opponents are doing specific terrible things. This gets the supporters all riled up. They attach to the accusations with enthusiasm because they align with what they want to believe. But when they receive the information that those who leveled the accusations were actually doing what they accused the other side of, it seems like it's not a big deal because they've already convinced themselves that their opponents were already doing it. But they weren't. It was all a setup. The clue in all of this is that if an accusation is made, then they are just telling us what they have already done. I think we have learned over the last few years all sorts of things about how to manipulate people, how to use them for your own means through the use of lies. We know that an effective strategy is to accuse others of what you have already done, and that if you lie constantly and in staggering numbers, those whose job it is to hold you accountable become overwhelmed and give up. Somehow, telling one lie seems worse than telling 100 lies because the sheer number of them tends to water them down. I don't know how long we will be able to continue the experiment of democracy, but if we are to have any shot at doing so, we need to get much better at detecting and dealing with lies. We have also talked about how it is easier to do anything when you are not encumbered by integrity, empathy, and honesty. These are the traits of those at the highest levels of spiritual awareness. It's very difficult and frustrating to watch the clash between those who try to do the right thing the right way and those who are interested exclusively in money and power. It doesn't look like a fair fight, and the notion that the honorable will prevail seems hard to hold on to. Our future is heavily dependent on whether or not we have the stomach to hold people accountable, both people who are currently in play and those who are no longer here, as in the ancestors who constructed and supported the toxic systems that still plague us. We have so much work ahead of us. It can feel overwhelming, but we are here for the turnaround. That is why we came. We can't allow distractions and numbing strategies to keep us from doing the work and learning the lessons we came here for. I read a quote that really stuck with me. It was this: people who want to preserve democracy have to win every election. People who want to dismantle it just have to win one. We need to get this political landscape cleaned up because we have issues that will require help from our government. We can't, as individuals, do everything it takes to reverse climate change. We are going to have record heat this week where I live. We experienced cold this last winter that hadn't been seen for decades. The thing that occurred to me is that we are the ones who will be paying the extra costs of climate change. We will pay the costs of additional energy needs to make our homes livable during these highs and lows. We will be paying added costs for crops that fail because the climate that always accommodated certain crops no longer will do so. All of the costs associated with the challenge will come out of our pockets, in addition to the taxes we pay. Seems the taxes we pay should be working with us to keep this expensive disaster from happening. We can't do it alone, nor can we shoulder the cost of it alone. Only the government can enforce the paying of taxes by the billionaires, and only the government can protect the workers who truly made the money for the billionaires. We need the government for the big things, but the government will never be perfect because it's made up of people, fallible and sometimes weak people, but it can be led by people who are at the higher levels of spiritual awareness, those who are actually driven by the need to help others instead of helping themselves. We can dream, but we must also raise our voices and do the work. I read a letter in the Carolyn Hack's advice column from a woman who was in the process of divorcing her husband. He was posting on social media that his divorce was devastating. Turns out the divorce was happening because he declared after more than 2 decades of marriage that he wanted an open marriage because he wasn't attracted to women his wife's age any longer. Of course, he was the same age, so his wife filed for divorce. Their grown children want to know what happened, and she was asking if she should continue to hide the details, even though he was leaving everyone with the impression that he was the injured party in the split. During the rebirth, many people will find that their relationships no longer fit. When people get together, they often have visions of what their life will look like, never factoring in that they will change over time and that the circumstances will change. We need to be with people who not only allow us the space to grow, we need our partners to grow too. We are all here to grow. But if you find yourself on very different levels of spiritual awareness, the fit will no longer work. The fact that his growth led him to believe that all his life and personal development lacked was the attention of a much younger woman does not make him seem as if he is someone who is figuring out the meaning of life. The wife wanted to know if she should disclose the reason they broke up. I suppose because it would make him look guilty and her innocent. But in relationships, do we really need to have a victim and a perpetrator? When you first get together, you seemingly have agreed to certain terms and conditions of your relationship. You have, in a huge way, clicked that small box at the bottom of the page. So let's imagine that you went the traditional route. Let's talk about the terms and conditions as they are laid out in a Protestant wedding ceremony. I take you to be my wife or husband, and I do promise and covenant before God and these witnesses to be your loving and faithful husband or wife in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live. So the terms you agree to, in fact, promise to God, is that you will love your partner, be faithful to your partner, you're going to stick around whether you have money or not, whether you're happy or not, whether you are sick or healthy, and you will do all of that until one or both of you dies. That is a somewhat standard agreement, one that is repeated in front of clergy and meant to be spiritually binding. Traditionally, those who witness the union are invested in making sure you both keep up your end of the bargain. But what happens when any part of that unravels? Does failing one or more parts of that agreement make the entire agreement null and void? That is never really explained. What happens when one party to the agreement violates the terms and conditions? The woman who was asking for advice felt like telling her children what happened would be the airing of dirty laundry. But is it really? Seems to me that all you have to do is say that the husband unilaterally decided to change the terms and conditions of their marriage, and that the new terms were not ones that the wife could or would agree to. He decided that he needed an open relationship, which means he wanted the freedom to pursue any and all other women that, in his imagination, were clamoring to be with him. I've seen how this plays out for men who get this notion later in life. It usually doesn't end as they wish it would. It's often a fantasy gone awry. And from the circumstances where I've seen this, the wife feels crushed for a while and then starts living the life she always imagined, one that was not possible when she was in her former relationship. When you initially sign the terms and conditions of a marriage, you are seemingly in agreement about whether or not you will pursue other relationships, where you will live, how you will live, whether you will have a family, and the like. What matters more than what you agree to is whether or not the agreement is bilateral. You must both be in agreement. But things change. Life changes us all. Or we don't change at all, which is even worse. When one person can no longer live within the confines of the original agreement, they do what this husband did. They tried to renegotiate the terms and conditions. He tried. She wasn't in agreement. They no longer have a bilateral agreement of what their marriage should be. In the wife's letter, she was very upset that he was telling people that he was gutted by this divorce. She thought that could not possibly be true, since he had initiated the action that blew them up. But I suspect he is gutted. In his fantasy, he was going to be able to maintain all the current positive aspects of his marriage while adding on some super hot young chicks. It was not to be. So he will be out on his own, trying to create a brand new life. That must feel gutting. His request ended up blowing up everything safe and predictable about his life. The road ahead will not be an easy one for him. If you really love someone, and I assume that you do if you're willing to marry them, you should want them to have what they need to be happy and to grow, even if it isn't with you. That is at odds with the vow of until death do us part. But we are not here to stifle one another, to trap each other in situations that no longer fit. Some romantic relationships run their course long before either one of the participants die. Each person has a mission that they came here to complete. In the course of life, one person's mission may no longer be in sync with the other person's mission. It may even be in direct opposition to the other partner's mission. One person may decide that they can no longer abide the concept of being faithful. One party may decide that they were wrong about how and where they wanted to live. One person may change their mind about the question of whether or not to have children. One partner's sorrow or sickness may be way beyond the capacity of the other partner. You can't know these things until they happen. It doesn't necessarily make someone the bad guy to change their mind or to grow into acceptance of their conflicting aspirations or innate limitations. We are all humans, and sometimes we bite off more than we can chew. I attended a Buddhist marriage and was really moved by their vows. They go like this. Do you pledge to help each other to develop your hearts and minds, cultivating compassion, generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiasm, concentration, and wisdom as you age and undergo the various ups and downs of life, and to transform them into the path of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity? Recognizing that the external conditions of life will not always be smooth, and that internally your own minds and emotions will sometimes get stuck in negativity, do you pledge to see all these circumstances as a challenge to help you grow, to open your hearts, to accept yourselves and each other, and to generate compassion for others who are suffering? Understanding that just as we are a mystery to ourselves, each other person is also a mystery to us. Do you pledge to seek to understand yourselves, each other, and all living beings, to examine your own minds continually, and to regard all the mysteries of life with curiosity and joy? Do you pledge to preserve and enrich your affection for each other and to share it with all others? To take the loving feelings you have for one another and your vision of each other's potential and inner beauty as an example, and rather than spiraling inwards and becoming self-absorbed, to radiate this love outward to all beings? Wow. This really moved me because it was about understanding that relationships are not static. It's about both people vowing to grow. It's about taking the love that two people have and turning that into a force that benefits the external world. In traditional marriages, the ultimate insult can be that you are not the person I married. The Buddhist vows are the antithesis of this notion. No one should, years down the road, be the person you married. That would mean that they had failed to cultivate anything higher in themselves, that they never took the time to truly know themselves, and that they failed to open up to all the world and its inhabitants have to offer. They have failed to grow. You notice, too, that these terms and conditions say nothing about faithfulness or needing to die to get out of the relationship. But what these terms and conditions lay out is all that you could do to grow as a person and as a partner and as a couple. I suspect that if people vowed to grow together in this way, there would be way fewer people who were looking for the escape hatch. I also suspect that fewer people would agree to this ambitious vision of what a marriage could be. In the United States, 51% of Protestant marriages end in divorce, while 10% of Buddhist marriages end in divorce. I'm certainly not saying that one organized religion is better than the other, because I'm not a big fan of the whole concept of organized religion. I use these statistics as a way to illustrate that different expectations can yield different results. We get to decide for ourselves what we want the terms and conditions of our relationships to be, but without a doubt, we must always look towards being in a very solid relationship with ourselves, because the relationship you have with yourself will outlive every other relationship you have. And everything is about growing and getting better. Thanks for returning for another week of Rebirth Revolution. It's fun to kick ideas about life around, You can always contact me by emailing rebirthrev@gmail.com. I'd love to hear about your experiences. We can be found on all the podcast apps, YouTube, and on social media. Please pass along the word. Until next week, think about what terms and conditions fit your life path. Don't try to change anyone else's terms and conditions. Get vaccinated if possible, and spend some time in complete silence. Remember, you are loved exactly as much as every other person on the planet, not 1 ounce more or 1 ounce less. Stay strong and safe and keep growing.